makes me wanna holler, go away. I need more peace and hope and love. Where do I find it in this crazy old world? I need strategies, strategies for living radio. Your dose of radio rehab. Strategies for living radio. Every time I listen, Lauren and David share strategies for living, and it makes me aware. I've got strategies for living, strategies for living radio. Your dose of radio rehab. Strategies for living radio. Your dose of radio rehab. Strategies for living radio.
Are you ready? Are you ready for your daily dose? Your daily dose of radio rehab.
We need them.
Yeah, we do. Some days we need them more than others.
The strategies.
Yeah.
And I'm ready to return to nature.
Well, we're going to do that today. Hey, folks, welcome into another edition of Strategies for Living. I'm Dr. David McMillan. She is psychotherapist, PLPC, Lauren Leon McMillan. You know, one of the great things, Lauren, about doing this program is you get to meet such unique people who are doing unique things.
Mm-hmm.
I had a show several years ago now with David Gessner. He is the Keenan Distinguished Professor in Creative Writing at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. But he wrote a book called Return of the Osprey, A Season of Flight and Wonder. It's a beautiful book.
The last time we had him, he was talking about Falco, the owl.
Yeah. And, the Osprey, Roger Torrey Peterson hailed it as the symbol of the New England coast, and it all but vanished in the 1950s and the 1960s because of DDT. Mm-hmm. And in the next few decades, the birds return slowly and then in a rush. And so now this book, David's wonderful book, Return of the Osprey, is out with a 25th anniversary edition. So I think he has revisited and has some things to report to us, some news to catch us up on.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting, thought-provoking, and educational to find out, what we need to find out in this 25th anniversary. Folks, thank you. Thank you for tuning in to Strategies for Living. We appreciate you being with us, and we appreciate our sponsors making it all possible. The Robinson Film Center, and Azalea Cleaners, and Pintail Roofing, Learning RX, We Train Your Brain, the Balanced Life Wellness Center, Fertitta's Delicatessen, home of the Godfather, Alligator Italian Sausage, pretty good Muffies too, SRT Sales Training, Uprising Addiction Center, and Mira Direct Primary Care. Back in a moment to meet Professor David Gessner right here on Strategies. Be right back.
Tune in daily, find the light. Healthy mind and spirits bright. Strategies for living strong. Feel the vibe, it won't go wrong. Body moves and soul align. Catch the rhythm, feel the time. Radio rehab every day. Chase those clouds of gray away. Your daily dose of radio rehab. Lift you up when skies seem trapped. Mind and body, spirits free. Living life in harmony.
And welcome into Strategies for Living. Lauren Leon McMillan, David McMillan. Let's welcome into the program now David Gessner. He is the Keenan Distinguished Professor in Creative Writing at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. He's the author of 14 books, including the New York Times bestseller, All the Wild That Remains. We are celebrating his 25th anniversary edition today of Return of the Osprey, a season of flight and wonder. Professor David Gessner, welcome. Welcome back to Strategies for Living.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Lauren. Great to be back.
So, all right. What first got you interested all those years ago? You
Good question.
You write about a lot of things.
Yeah.
What got
Yes.
you? What got your attention all those years ago?
I will try to quickly. It's a little bit of a tangent, but it's kind of necessary for it. I grew up in Massachusetts. I've actually watched Ospreys down in your neck of the woods quite a bit.
Oh, really?
But I grew up in, I was down there the whole summer during the BP oil spill. I worked for the Natural Resource Defense Council, so I was down in Venice and Buras and Plaquemines Parish, and great, amazing bird watching. Of course, it was very poignant and moving during this, seeing the oiled birds, not just the oiled pelicans, but oiled ospreys as well.
Yeah.
Right.
So my background, I graduated from college, and I was 23 years old, and I decided I wanted to be a great writer. That was my vague ambition, which really translated into becoming a carpenter and a bookstore clerk and working in a homeless shelter. Well, my daughter's going into the arts, and I'm like, okay, well, good luck. The things my parents warned me about turned out to be true. But I kept writing.
All right. If we've got any listeners that are creative writing majors out there, pay no attention to the professor. Go ahead.
No, it's a good story in the end.
Okay.
So I was writing, trying to write novels, because it was Hemingway was on my brain, and Thomas Wolfe, and I didn't really know anything about it, and I didn't know any writers, and my parents didn't know any writers. But I kept going, and then a series of things happened, but basically I moved to Colorado for grad school when I was 30.
Right.
And finally, I decided, at the time I just recovered from testicular cancer, which I had when I was 30.
Oh, wow.
And my dad had lung cancer, and so finally I took my tools that I'd used from fiction and wrote a book about what was going on with my father and my own recovery. And I wrote it. It was called A Wild Rank Place, which was a quote from Thoreau about Cape Cod during the off season. It is a wild rank place, and there is no flattery in it. Because even though Cape Cod's 100 miles from Boston, in the winter, you'd think you were in Alaska sometimes. So, so he was down there, and I was taking care of him. And I wrote this book, and it was with a small press. And people said very nice things about it, but one thing they said was he's a nature writer. And I didn't think I thought it was writing a book about mortality and my dad and me. Yeah. But there was a nature in it. Yeah. So then I wrote that book mostly, even though it was about Cape Cod, while I was in Colorado. And then I moved back with my wife, who I'd met in Colorado, to Cape Cod to promote the book, but I ended up staying there for 6 years. And I turned around and wrote a book about loving Colorado when I got to Cape Cod. And once again, they said nice things about my book, but said I was a nature writer. And I finally went, enough's enough. I'm a writer. I'm not a nature writer, right? So I wrote an essay called Sick of Nature, which was my declaration of independence from the nature genre. Okay. And so far my books have been with little presses, and an editor in New York read the essay. And within the essay, even though I say I'm sick of nature, I wrote about birds. And she wrote it to me and said, you write beautifully about birds in your essay, Sick of Nature. Could I get you to do a nature book? And I was like, okay, the world is forcing me to be a nature writer. And she said, I'd like you to write a book about birds. And I'd moved back with my wife to Cape Cod and to the place I first loved, nature in. And, she sealed the deal by doing something that no editor had ever done before. She offered me in advance.
Oh.
And so I could quit my job, not much, it was like $5,000 or something, but it was enough to quit my job.
Yeah.
And I said to her, I'm not going to write a book about robins or sparrows or semi-palmated plovers. But when I was a kid on Cape Cod, there were no ospreys because of DDT having been wiped out. And now I'd come back with my wife. This is the 90s, and I'm with my wife, and ospreys are everywhere. And so I said to her, I'll write a book about birds, but I'm going to write a book about a big athletic raptor that dives from 50 feet up and into the water for fish. And she said, yeah, do it. So I got my money. I quit my job. I bought a Bushnell Spacemaster telescope, and I went out to the marsh in March, pretty cold and windy, when the birds started to return from South America. And I had 4 nests I watched, and I plopped down, and I was a total beginner. I couldn't tell an osprey from a seagull, but I also knew that I had the whole year, the whole season in front of me,
right,
to really get to know the birds. And I went and sought out the guy who'd literally written the book about ospreys, Alan Poole, who became kind of my Obi-Wan Kenobi of ospreys. And he said, you've got to slow down. You've got to learn to live on osprey time. So the next month or two were spent going to these nests, spending hours there. I was bored to tears at first, but getting into the rhythm of the bird's life and starting to learn to live on osprey time.
Yeah.
And I watched as the birds rebuilt these huge nests that are on, I don't know if you've ever seen them, they're on top of human-made platforms. Big sloppy nests. They're pack rats. They have like Christmas tinsel or Easter tinsel. They have rope in them. One nest had a naked Barbie doll jammed into it, and the fact that they were slobs also endeared. I love that they were athletes. I was an athlete at the time,
right?
But I also was kind of a slob. My dad used to call me Dirty Dave, and I'm like, these big gregarious, outgoing birds. I started to learn about them, and I really learned that by just diving fully into this thing, suddenly I was kind of living osprey for a while. So that's how it started. And that was, 28 years ago,
right?
27 years ago. But I've continued to kind of have ospreys be part of my life. And I'll tell a story about that a little later. But that was how it started.
So how did that slowing down, that observing the ospreys, how did that affect your inner landscape? How you began to orient?
That's a great question. And I'll say this, a lot of people, when you talk about patience and things like that, they assume you have to be kind of a Zen monk, and mine was a little awkward at first, the movement into it. Yeah. And I always think now that patience is a great virtue, but when, like, say, a great blue heron hunting for fish is patient, or an osprey hunting for fish is patient, it's not doing it because it's doing it for a very practical reason. Sure. It pays to be patient. And I was doing it for the similar reason. I wanted to write this book about the birds. So I had this ulterior motive, but it then started to pay off in interior ways, where I really was kind of simplifying, my life. My life kind of was, I'd never seen an osprey dive, and that's the pinnacle of osprey artistry. They come from 100 feet down, they go bombing down head first, and then they pop a wheelie, go in and grab a fish and lift off and shake off like a wet dog. And I'd never seen that. So I started to use everything I knew about nature to, like, basically hunt for seeing an osprey dive. And so when I did, it was this kind of euphoric moment when I first saw it. The dives, and then I started to see more and more. So it did change my internal landscape in a lot of ways that I didn't expect, and it really revolved around being more focused on one thing. Of course, this is before the screens took over our lives.
Right.
This is 28 years ago, but it was this Thoreau says in Walden, simplify, 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 and that was a big part of it for sure.
Yeah.
Very neat.
We've got a lot to catch up in terms of from your first book to this 25th anniversary edition, and now with your I understand the preface to the 25th anniversary edition. It's a beautiful book, folks. But you start out, where is home, and how do we get there? So now I understand.
That's a big part of it.
Yeah,
they were, I was unsettled. I think a lot of us are geographically unsettled. I'd been in 2 or 3 different places, and finally I felt. Turned out I was wrong, but I felt during that year like this is where we want to root down. This is where we want our place to be. And the Ospreys were role models in that. And then the irony later on was that, yes, that was their home that they rooted to in the nesting season, but then they took off for South America. So the kind of final punchline of my book, it did well, but it kind of ends on a note of I will stay on Cape Cod forever. But right after that, my wife got pregnant, and some professors in North Carolina read the book and offered me a job teaching. So by saying I would live there forever, I ended up moving 1,000 miles away.
I love it.
And it was so my new question was how to be in movement. Maybe we don't have to.
There you go.
Maybe we don't have to be in one place, right?
Professor David Gessner is our life strategist today, and I think you can hear why he is such a good one. It's Return of the Osprey is out. It's a beautiful book in the 25th anniversary edition, A Season of Flight and Wonder. We've got much more to learn from our life strategist professor today. Here on Strategies for Living. Stay right where you are. More to come.
We all have problems every day. We all need help along the way. We need strategies for living radio.
And welcome back. Welcome back into Strategies for Living. Lauren Leon McMillan, David McMillan, with Professor David Gessner, New York Times best-selling author. He's got a 25th anniversary edition of Return of the Osprey. Just out, A Season of Flight and Wonder. Beautiful little book out from Comstock Publishing. That's out of Cornell University Press. And David, let's revisit. What did you learn when you wrote the book? Okay, so you were talking about learning the patience and the learning to watch. Okay, so I'm particularly interested in the environmental aspect of this. So the Osprey were almost wiped out by DDT. And then you found that they had made a comeback. This is 30 years ago, whenever you were 27, 28 years ago.
And after they banned DDT.
And after DDT was banned. And so was that the magic that brought the Osprey back? How did that happen? And then I want to visit what you obviously have done some updated research for this 25th anniversary edition. So I want to know what you've learned. But let's start all those years ago when the Osprey came back. How did that happen?
Well, I think, as I started to learn more about the birds, by day I was out on the marsh and watching the birds. And by night I was reading about the birds. And there's a great quote from John Muir, which is, when you pick up anything in the universe, you find it hitched to everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And the crazy thing was, that suddenly I was realizing ospreys were hitched to so many things, including the birth of environmental law and early environmentalism. Because, after World War II, DDT was sprayed everywhere to, not for a bad reason, to try to kill insects.
Right.
But what happened was it would kill like the mosquitoes, and then, the fish would eat the mosquitoes and get sick, and the ospreys would eat the fish.
Mm-hmm.
And this horrible thing happened with the ospreys, where the DDT in their system caused their eggshells to thin, so that when they incubated and sat on the eggs, they would crush their young. So it was this horrific thing. And in Massachusetts, for instance, in 1970, we were down to 10 pairs in the whole state.
Oh, wow.
There are
Wow.
hundreds.
Jeez.
So this happened, and some folks on Long Island observed this on their own marshes, and this was in the 60s, and they'd read Silent Spring by Rachel Carson,
Right.
and so they were inspired by that, and they noticed what was happening, and they noticed the ospreys were missing, and they formed a little neighborhood environmental group, and they sued the Mosquito Commission on Long Island, and they brought in ospreys as Exhibit A, and miraculously they won the suit, and they kind of got momentum, and they eventually became the Environmental Defense Fund, and their motto was "Sue the bastards."
I love it.
and
It
they
works.
did, and they won in New York, and they won other states, and by 1972 the EPA outlawed DDT, and the effects were immediate, and not just on ospreys, pelicans and bald eagles, and all birds.
Yeah.
And so by the time I came back to Cape Cod, there were thousands of ospreys there rather than 10 pairs. And so to me, that was a startling and exciting part of the story, because it was an example of human beings exercising restraint and it having an immediate effect on nature. You could see.
Well, exercising restraint and another R word, responsibility. Yeah.
Exactly. Being stewards,
Yes.
rather than, and it's really pretty exciting. So I was reading this at night, and by day going out to the marsh, and I would watch as the osprey, there's something called phenology, right? This knowledge of how the year turns.
Right.
And I was really closely observing the year, to the point where later in the year, at one point I said to my wife, the seals should be back soon. The seals migrate up to Maine where it's colder, in the summer. And the next day they came back, and I felt like I'd gotten a promotion at work. I was jumping around bragging to her about
I love it.
So, and then I watched as the little reptilian heads popped up over the nests as the young were born. And one of my favorite images was the male would bring the fish back, and the male would be eating it over in a tree, eating the whole fish itself, and the female would like, cue, 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 like, bring it over here.
Right.
He would bring it over. She would take it and tear into it kind of savagely, and oh so delicately place it in the gaping, maws of the nestlings. And I love that marriage of the savage and the delicate. It was really intense.
Yeah.
And later in the summer, I went up to a fish market, got a fish, got some pliers out, and tried to have that experience of pulling them apart. And my wife was on the back deck, and she came out and was kind of rolling her eyes. And when she tells the story, she claims I was wearing a loincloth, but I don't own a loincloth. So, but she was basically, enough is enough. You're not actually an osprey.
Yeah.
So it became very intense. And so it was, and there was a point where I remember walking into my nest. You had to go down this path through the woods, and somebody was coming back, and their eyes were lit up, and I kind of wanted to say, have you found ospreys too? There was a kind of religious fervor to it.
Yeah.
So I went from knowing nothing about them to being pretty much obsessed with them, and that became kind of the plot of the book. And the other thing that happened was I had a big journal out there with me, and I was taking notes the whole time, but I knew that I couldn't really start the book until they flew south in September.
Yeah.
I was just going to collect and collect. So I was holding back, and restraint again, I guess. And when they left, it was like a starting gun going off, and I wrote the entire draft of the book in 1 month, October.
Wow. Wow.
I just went because I'd been building it up inside me, so it was great.
Yeah.
And I just want to go back to one thing I said. I ended up moving to North Carolina because some people. The thing I didn't realize when I moved here is that the mascot of the school, the university where I teach, was an osprey.
Huh.
Oh,
And
wow.
2 months after I got here, some frat guys had hacksawed off the statue of the Osprey in front of the main administrative building and brought it back to their dorm room, and they were caught, of course. So they brought the Osprey back and re-welded it, and they invited me to come down and read from Return of the Osprey while they were returning the statue. So it was crazy.
I'm hearing a whole lot of synchronicity in here. I mean,
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, there's a value, as a writer, you mentioned younger writers, to really plunging in and getting, focusing on one thing. And the beauty of it as a writer is you can be kind of a serial obsessor.
Yeah.
Your next book can be totally different, but you kind of learn that technique of fully absorbing, one
diving
subject.
Immersing,
So when you dove back in for this 25th anniversary edition, what did you find? I mean, are things kind of as they were, or what are you finding now? What have you found now?
Well, it's really the book is pretty much the book it was, other than my preface, but totally unexpectedly, we are in the midst. And interestingly, two of the places that are most in the midst of a new Osprey crisis are Louisiana and the Chesapeake Bay. And
what's going on? What is it?
Comes from a totally different threat, and the threat is the industrial fishing for menhaden, the small bait fish that is the Osprey's main food source.
Oh, wow!
And there's only a couple states, only a couple places in the country. Virginia allows it, and I believe it's allowed in Louisiana as well. And you have a single company, Omega Protein, that takes millions of tons of these fish, and these fish are the building block, not just for ospreys, but for bluefish and stripers, and actually for whales even. So, and they're not evil. I mean, they've always taken the same amount, only now there are fewer fish. So taking the same amount means suddenly the osprey numbers in the central Atlantic coast, and even moving farther north, are plummeting and going back to the bad old days of DDT. So it's a new issue, and I had no idea when I was coming back into it. So I just traveled up the East Coast and visited all these scientists, and went from state to state, and and it's another osprey fight. It's nice that we have the kind of predecessor of the DDT fight to say, if we restrain ourselves again, we can save the birds. But so I really didn't know that this is what I'd be finding when I returned to Ospreys. And it's interesting because it's one hopeful thing here is it's one of the few issues where you have some reaching across the aisle, because very conservative. You have commercial fishermen wearing MAGA hats who are fighting the same fight as Sierra Club and environmentalists. And actually, weirdly, I think that's one of the hopeful environmental things these days is, if you think of Teddy Roosevelt, who was both a hunter and, great environmentalist.
Right.
Yeah.
This union, which is historically, there's historic precedent, it's still there. And actually, one of the reasons that the assault on public lands was extricated from the big, beautiful bill was because you had this, this union of hunting groups and outdoorsmen with environmentalists who are both like, no, don't take away our public lands.
Yeah. Yeah. Good to know.
So here we go again, with pick up one thing and hitch to everything else in the universe.
That's right.
I didn't even anticipate it at all.
A season of flight and wonder. Return of the Osprey. 25th anniversary edition is out. David Gessner is the best-selling author and our life strategist today. We are learning a great deal. I bet the professor's classes are hard to get into. We'll talk a little bit about that and more coming back here on Strategies for Living. Yeah. Back in a moment with Strategies.
have problems every day. We all need help along the way. We need strategies, 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 strategies for living radio.
And welcome back into Strategies for Living Radio. Lauren Leon McMillan, David McMillan with Professor David Gessner today. New York Times best-selling author of many books, including Return of the Osprey. And this beautiful little book is in its 25th anniversary edition. And it's, you need to get a copy of it.
Yeah, and it's not just about the birds.
No.
Right? It's about life and about nature and how we live a part of it all.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. I want to pick on the professor for a moment, if I can.
Sure.
There's a lot of
Pick on
people.
him.
There's a lot of people out there, David, that that say, I got a book in me, or I got a couple of books in me, and there's a lot of people that probably have a lot of good books in them that never get them out of them.
Right.
So I just, you've certainly been, you have plied your trade. You are teaching what you know, because from your explanation of your journey. Oh my goodness. I bet people are I bet your classes are packed. So give us an idea of
Sure.
how do we get stuff out of us when we know we've got something in us?
Okay, great. Well, I remember doing a reading from Return of the Osprey years ago, and I was saying I'm very obsessed with the birds, and someone came up, a young writing student, afterward and said, "Yeah, I know the book's partly about being obsessed with the birds, but I think it's also about writing."
Yeah.
The book's about, because and the things I described earlier, the patience, the note taking, and then the burst. Really became, one thing I learned during that year was a method of writing that I've kept with me. Like last time I spoke to you was about Flacco, and I said that, I went over to Finland to see Eurasian eagle owls,
Right.
and I had a class, and I was trying to get them to learn more, to write about themselves, but also write about the outside world. And I said, go on a vacation with a purpose. Go to a place, whether it's Finland or, the neighborhood next door, and with the idea that you're going to learn about it, just like I was talking about learning about the Ospreys.
Yeah.
I had a wonderful teacher when I was in Colorado, Linda Hogan, Native American writer of fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. And she assigned a simple assignment. She said, go watch an animal for a month. Go just spend an hour a day and take notes. And I watched a great blue heron, and basically that's what led to all this other stuff, this observing. On a practical note, I feel like, particularly, this is more for writers who already started. I don't know if it's for somebody who has a book and hasn't done anything. I feel like dailiness is a superpower, even if it's just half an hour a day. To have that regular time where you sit down. I say to my students, it doesn't have to be a rainy day in October when you're listening to Neil Young to be inspired.
Yeah.
It can be, it can be a regular thing of the dailiness. And then, beginning is always terrifying business. It's always the hardest. And once you get the ball rolling, momentum is the whole game to me for writing. It's like, and that's what dailiness leads to, right? You get it going. When you return to something that's already moving, it's so much easier, and you're so much better than it is when you go away from it for a long time and let it sit. So, sooner or later, if you're starting a project, you're going to have to deal with the difficulty of beginning, and it's not really pleasant for a little bit. But the thing is, once you break through, you start moving. And I just feel, Anne Lamott, writing teacher, called them, I don't know if I can swear, but first drafts. You have to be willing not to be a perfectionist at first, to write bad get to the good.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to me, it's really, my background, I was an athlete when I was younger, and I feel like that helped me a ton with writing, like the daily schedule. It's a little like going for runs or training, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And not being too concerned with the quality at first. It's ingraining the habits that are almost more important than the words at first.
Yeah.
The words can come, if some people, my favorite quote about writing, in terms of natural talent is Steve Martin's line, which is, some people have a way with words, others not have way. So, it's so I if a kid comes to writing, I mean, it's good to have some natural ability, but so much of it is the work and the discipline of it. And I've seen extremely talented writers who just don't understand that you have to sit down, you have to keep your butt in the chair, basically.
Yeah. And
so you're bringing up one of my favorite topics, and I can proselytize quite a bit about because I'll tell you what, especially as I get older, it's just such a pleasure. It's just such a fun thing to do. It's kind of, in a weird way, there's a part of it that's like carpentry because it's problem solving. Where does this go? How do you do it? And then there's a part that's a little bit magic where it comes, it just comes from seemingly nowhere.
What I'm hearing as a thread is almost this sort of spiritual, like, devotion quality that comes through.
Yeah, and also spiritual devotion, but also a pragmatic aspect to it too.
Sure.
Kind of like, it's actually to kind of unite it with what we were talking about with Ospreys. Those two things were also, there was this, there was the spiritual aspect of it, of being out there, but also the, putting your butt in the chair there too, where you're looking through the telescope, and you're doing the work. So both things for sure.
Yeah. So I what I hear you saying to all of us is kind of the Nike swish, just do it. Just do it.
I mean, there is. I mean, if you think you have a book in you, and that can be an intimidating thing, to think, how do I do this whole thing?
Yeah.
And that's why in Lamont's book was called Bird by Bird. She had a report due on, the birds of somewhere, and she was overwhelmed. She procrastinated. And her dad just said, well, you should do it bird by bird.
Bird by bird. I love it.
Tackle one and then tackle the next. But there's another aspect. The spiritual aspect is true, but the other aspect is a little bit of courage is required. Because you might fail, right? You might fall short.
Yeah, you got to be willing to fail. David Gessner, our life strategist today. New book. Well, it's actually 25th anniversary. New old book. New edition. 25th anniversary edition of Return of the Osprey. Worth your read. Go get it. We'll be back here on Strategies. Stay with us. And welcome back. Welcome back into Strategies for Living. Lauren Leon McMillan, David McMillan, Professor David Gessner. Isn't he great? Yeah. Folks, you got to get this book, Return of the Osprey. It's out in a 25th anniversary edition. David, what do you want to, we've covered a lot of ground today. What do you want to leave people with? What do you want people to especially take away from this conversation that we've had today?
Well, Lauren mentioned the spiritual aspect, and I'll say that while I was working on this, man in his 80s, the great nature writer, Cape Cod nature writer John Hay, whose grandfather was John Hay, who was Secretary of State with Teddy Roosevelt, and he'd also earlier been at Lincoln's side when Lincoln died after the assassination. He had come to Cape Cod in the 50s and knew nothing about nature and learned more about it. And he'd come from obviously a very powerful family, but he'd turned to the natural world. And he said to me he said, how strange to have come through the whole century and find that the most interesting thing is the birds. And then he paused and said, maybe it's just that the human mind is more interesting when looking outside and beyond itself. You know, and I think that for me, the book's about my family, it's about myself, but it's also about looking beyond, you know, the human,
well
anthropocentric and toward the world.
Return of the Osprey. David Gessner, thank you so much for being a great life strategist. Can't wait for the next time we have you on.
Thank you.
Folks, thank you for tuning in to Strategies for Living. We appreciate you, and we appreciate our sponsors who make it possible. The Robinson Film Center, Azalea Cleaners, Pintail Roofing, Learning RX, We Train Your Brain, the Balanced Life Wellness Center, Fertitas Delicatessen, home of the Godfather, Alligator Italian Sausage, SRT Sales Training, Uprising Addiction Center, and Mira Direct Primary Care. If today were the last day of your life, you only had one more phone call to make, who would you call? And what would you say? And why are you waiting? Make the call. For Lauren Leon McMillan, for David Gessner, I'm David McMillan. See you next time, right here on Strategies for Living.